Hey guys, Jarretman here, back with another 500 Zoom video. Just your typical play and explain here. I do have my raise size set to 2.2 from every position. I'm just going to leave it on that for now. I'm going to switch it back to 2.5 later. The main difference being that when you're playing single raise pots, the big blind's range, like single raised versus the big blind's range is going to be a little bit wider, so you can barrel a little bit more aggressively in general. Also on some boards, he's going to have a stronger range on some boards where he can have like the off-suited two pairs and the off-suited straights, specifically on the low boards. I like this board as just a bet 1/3 with your range candidates. It is a board where you'd gain some EV by having a big size, but not that much. King 10 off, not quite strong enough to continue all the time. I think we'll continue it some of the time here. Table 1, I think his range is very, very ace-x weighted. It's going to be tough for him to find bluffs here on the river, I feel. And I kind of hate folding this hand. I feel like this hand is never a fold considering I bet 1/3 on the flop, but yeah, I'm going to make the fold. I think that's an exploitable fold there. I 3-bet to a little bit bigger than I should, but it's fine coming from the big blind. Just gonna try to stick with 2 tables here. So very good board for me in the big blind. My raising range from the big blind, my 3-betting range I should say, interacts with this board very well. He's gonna 4-bet jacks and 10s at low frequency, maybe not 10s, but I still have 8s, 10s, jacks, jack 10s suited, all the broadways. I have hands like jack 8 suited, jack 9 suited, jack 7 suited, 10-7 suited, 9-7 suited. A lot of those middling suited connector hands where he might not continue those, and also we just have all of the good overpairs and he doesn't. With our exact combo on the turn and now on the river, I don't think there's much value in betting. I'm just considering whether a bet 1/3 makes any sense at all, and I don't think it does. Like, sorry, let me rephrase that. Betting 1/3 can make sense on the river, as we can definitely get called by worse, like low pocket pairs, potentially even ace highs, 8x. So yeah, maybe the block bet on the river was the play there, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. We get a check back on table 2. King high boards in general are good candidates to to bet your range on. However, specifically on like king low low when you're versus the big blind, they're gonna have more of trips than you do. And we'll check back the ace again. They're gonna have more trips than you do, and especially when I'm raising to this small size on the button, the 2.2 sizing, he's gonna have a lot of 3x actually, a lot more than me. But we have the upper nutted end and he doesn't. And now on the river, our value betting range is going to be any ace, potentially any king, and all our bluffs are going to be hands that just decided to check back the flop and don't have any equity or reason to bet the turn, and now turn themselves into a bluff on the river. If we get to the river with any like no equity hands, I think we bluff basically all of them. We'll check back the 5-4 on table 1. It's a board that favors him, but small blind versus big blind, he's going to still have a lot of checks. When he bets 1/3 on the turn, I'm expecting his range to be relatively capped. Like he could still have pocket aces. Like that's a hand that would make sense to take this line. This is close, table 1. Or sorry, table 2. This is definitely close. I'm gonna go for the 4-bet, however. I'm gonna size it up a little bit just because he went so small with his 3-bet. Table 1, this card is actually a better card for us as we have 2-3 suited and he doesn't. However, that's only 4 combos. But it does improve some of our hands like Jack 4 suited, 5-4 off, Ace 4 off, which he can have some of those as well. But overall, I would say it's a better card for our range than it is for his range. So table 2, it's a very good board for the 4-better. These ranges are going to be, okay, we get a 3-bet on table 1. Not a pure 3-bet, small blind versus cutoff here. Very good board for the 4-better. The big blind shouldn't have any 2x. We don't have any 2x as well. So those are basically like dead cards out there, which are great when you're the 4-better. The 10 is also relatively neutral. While the big blind can have some 10x, it doesn't really influence his range that much in a positive way. Yes, his 10x is a strong hand, but his 10x is basically drawing dead versus our overpairs. So, well, not drawing dead, but, drawing thin versus our overpairs. And we can have, queens plus almost pure, jacks, hands that he just doesn't have. His range equity-wise is actually doing pretty well on this flop, just because his range is more condensed to like pairs where we're more polarized. So equity-wise, he's doing better, but EV-wise, combining the fact that we're in position and we have the polarized range, we're actually doing a lot better on this board. And it's cutoff big blind, so his range is a bit wider than just like pairs and stuff. I don't think this bet works very often on table 1, but it only has to work one out of, 3-4 times, something like that. And we can definitely have some hands that take this line. So if we have like pocket 10s, pocket 9s, totally makes sense for us to take this line. If we have a hand like Jack 10, Jack 9 suited, even a hand like, I guess Ace 8 suited wouldn't really 3-bet that much versus cutoff, but if we had a hand like, 9s, 10s, Jack 10, maybe Queen Jack that checked twice, it's a little too thin to bet big on the river. And if we were trapping with a hand like aces or the nut flush or something along those lines, I don't think it makes too much sense to always bet those for a big size. So we can definitely keep ourselves uncapped on the river by having the small size. And the problem is we have a lot of bluff candidates on the river if we're playing our range in any sort of reasonable way on this board. And because we have a lot of bluff candidates, we just have to be careful not to over bluff. But I think these like bad king highs are the hands that want to be betting the most, as they're the hands that are... Okay, we'll go for the check raise on table 1, get our high number. It's a nice hand to check raise. Paired boards are often good candidates to check raise aggressively versus the small size, especially when the pair is the low card that you can have more of. But you can't go absolutely insane. Otherwise, they can just start 3-betting you or floating you extremely wide, and you're in a very tough position you're in a tough spot out of position with a wide range. It's never a good spot to be. So yeah, like this is the worst king high I can have in this spot. So I think it makes almost a mandatory bet on the river, just because I don't think we have, like, I think this combo wants to bluff pure is what I'm trying to say. Ace 5 suited in these positions, you might see some pre-flop sims that mix this in as a cold 4. I think if we were in position, like if this was hijack cutoff 3-bet and we're on the button, then I'd want to mix in the ace-5 suited. But when we're out of position, I think I just want to go linear. And what I mean by that is just picking like the strongest of hands. And our bluff candidates are going to be hands like king-queen suited, stuff like that. We'll open the 7-8 suited. We're facing a kind of large 3-bet, but we'll still make the call. We're only opening this a small percentage of the time. From the hijack, like we're not opening it pure, and when we do open it, we will continue versus the 3-bet. Not a high EV spot here. And on the flop versus the pot size bet, I think 8-7 we can just fold. We just have very low visibility on turns and rivers. Even if we are ahead versus a hand like king queen, it's got a lot of equity versus us, and we're just likely gonna end up folding on turns and rivers, which is fine in some cases in poker, but in this case, I think our playability, visibility, everything about our hand is bad on a turn that's not an 8 or a 7. Also, when the turn becomes an 8, there's a 50-50 chance it brings in a flush as well. So, yeah, that's a small thing. If he had bet 1/3, we would continue. Maybe this has to continue some of the time versus the pot size bet, but I'm just expecting ace-king all day. Table 2 will mix between check raising and check calling. Let me get a 56. Okay, we'll go for the check call. Our range is relatively capped. Ah, that sucks. And it's nice to include these types of hands some of the time. However, you don't need to have the nuts to call him down when he's bluff catching. So you generally want to be developing your range in a way that allows you to put more money in when you have nutted hands. Yeah, I think he played it fine. The river, if he had ace-8, I would say it's a mandatory bet, but yeah, I think queen-8 is close. I think his line is very reasonable. We're gonna go for the check back on table 1. If you wanted to play this spot as an overbetter check back, I think that would be a good strategy if you were to pick just one bet sizing. And pretty clear bet on the river. I think our hand class, theory-wise, can even go for like a larger bet, like a small overbet. But I think practical-wise, it makes more sense maybe to just go for the normal size. But yeah, our hand is definitely strong enough to bet for the overbet, is what I'm trying to say. Good board for us, table 2. It is a board where if you're going to play, like I think this board, the rainbow version specifically, if you are going to play a leading range from the big blind, that would be, this is like the prime candidate, because versus his raise size, we have like all the 5-4 off, and we're crushing him. Okay, we get a check. We're crushing him in the nutted portion of our range. We still have a disadvantage in like the air portion of our range. Like we still have more air than him. However, a lot of our air still ends up having like a gut shot or some interaction with this board, especially the rainbow version. So yeah. Okay. We'll go for the overbet here on table 2. We can definitely play some 6x like this. Also, the bottom of our overbetting value range could be any 10 as well. And we get our high number. So if we're going to bluff, we're going to choose the sizing. Our blockers are not the greatest, I'm going to say. I think we would prefer to block, like the hands that he's going to call us down with here are like a 3, a 7, some sort of, I guess, 10, but mostly his range is going to be weak pairs like that, like maybe 4s or 5s. So maybe we want to block those hands. I'm not exactly sure. Just a small note here. The reason that the rainbow board is better for you as the big blind rather than the flush draw version, it's not because like your equity runs better necessarily on the rainbow board, but your EV does run better, I'm pretty sure, because when it's the flush draw board, you being out of position is more of a detriment. It's worse to be out of position when you're on a flush draw board than it is on a rainbow board, because the flush draw board is more dynamic and therefore the nuts are going to change more often. The current nuts, I mean. And if that's the case, then the in-position player gains an advantage. Being able to dictate when you can see turns and rivers and at what price is a big advantage on dynamic boards. Also, one of the reasons why you might want to develop a leading range here, because this board is going to get checked back at a super high frequency. The reason I don't develop leading ranges on these boards is that it is incredibly hard to balance. If you're playing against players that aren't really paying attention, or players you're not really going to play against again, like for example a tournament or a live game, then I wouldn't worry too much about that. But these players are all very strong. A lot of these players are much better than me, and they're going to pick up on the fact that you have leads here. And if you have leads, that means that your checking range is going to be a lot weaker, unless you're balancing it appropriately. I think this hand is close. Yeah, okay. We'll make the call. He bet slightly under 1/3. He bet like 30%. And again, our visibility and our equity realization is not very strong with a hand like Jack 9 of clubs. But I think given the weak ranges and everything, we can go ahead and make the call. Excuse me. Then on the river, we get our low number, but I think we end up at the river. Like we can bet a king. We can bet, if we had a hand like ace 10 of hearts, we could bet that maybe for the small size as well. Okay, we get our low number. We'll go for the check here on table 1. And this is the worst hand I think we can show up with, aside from a hand like 6-5 suited, 5-4 suited, which we don't have that many of those. And I think if we want to approach this river spot linearly, in the sense of like what hands we want to bluff, do we want to bluff like I'm going to go for the 75% sizing with our hand. I think it makes sense to have this sizing. I don't think an overbet makes too much sense here, as the big blind can potentially have like even 9-6 off, more 5-6 for sure. Okay, I'm going to go for the check fold. Potentially a check raise. I'm going to roll it. No. Okay. I changed my mind. I don't like, the reason I didn't want to bluff here is I don't really like the 9. I would rather, I think, have a 5 or a 6. I think those actually block more straight combos, where a 9, of course, blocks straight combos, but I think he's likely to bet Jack 9 on the flop. And I think that he has more 9x that are bluffs than he does 9x that are straights. So it's deceptively maybe a bad blocker. Bad blocker in the sense that we might block more of his bluffs than we do value hands. So if we had a hand like ace 5 that now gives up the river, I think I would much prefer we roll a check back on table 1. I think I much prefer, yeah, going for that bet. Sorry, for the check raise or the bluff with when we have a 5 or a 6. I think a 6 might even be the best. but I'm not sure here. I guess we'll check down our ace high. Now I'm considering bluffing it on the river. I don't think that he takes this snap check, snap check, snap check line with a air hand very much, so I think our hand is basically dead. But this is a spot that's traditionally overbluffed for my shoes, so I'm just going to check. Expecting to get heroed a decent amount in this spot. Not that I'm worried about his calling frequency necessarily, but I do want to stay in this spot especially relatively balanced in that I don't want to be bluffing all the time. When you consider how our flop checking range is structured, we will be checking back some hands with one heart, but not that many. We're going to be betting them more often than when we're going to be checking them. So that's another consideration to take into effect when we're on the river and how many heart combo hands we actually have. We can mix some 3-bets in with a king nine off. This is a spot where we can bet 2 pair for sure on the river. Maybe I was gonna say like a weak king, but I think that's a little too thin. But yeah, I think we could bet a weak king if we checked king like king 6 suited twice. Like let's say we had king 6 of spades. I think maybe we can bet that on the river here. I'm not sure if we can bet it, but I think I would bet it on the river. Again, because I'm expecting to get heroed a lot. And I'm expecting their range to be a little bit weaker than it should be, maybe. Couple easy folds. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm curious. I'm assuming a lot of the people that watch my videos might also play poker live, like they might play in casinos or other games. If your country has casinos open that have poker, I'd be curious if you just leave me a comment down below. I'm of course in Canada, and there are no casinos open. I know in the States there's different provinces. There's different states that have casinos open under different regulations. I know Vegas is open 6-handed. King queen off, not strong enough to call versus the 4-bet. I start to see some people mixing in these like really small 4-bets, like less than 2.5x, even from out of position. And I think king queen off would start to become a call versus that size. So we're not folding any king. We're really not folding any jack or any king. Like the problem in these spots is that how aggressively this spot is supposed to be played and how real people actually play these spots on like triple Broadway type boards is very different. He's supposed to be barreling very polar and a lot of like no equity hands, or at least including some like no equity hands, but maybe not that many because he has like ace x and 10x. But yeah, we're not folding a king, so like on the river it's close, but I still think versus that size we're really not folding any kings given small blind versus big blind. I could be wrong on that one. I'd be surprised if we fold a king there. We roll a bet on table 2. Pretty good board for the button in this spot, actually. The big blind's range is going to be heavily diluted on 10-9-9 to hands that don't really interact with this board as well, because he's going to end up 3-betting a lot of those middling hands like jack 8 suited, you know, jack 9 suited, jack 10 suited, queen jack suited, all those types of hands. And he has like the offsuit varieties and the offsuit 9s and some suited 9s, but just overall his range gets diluted a lot where ours stays intact. Not to mention we're in position on a dynamic board, so. I think the equities would run in the button's favor a lot on this board. And the EVs, I think the button's also going to over-realize, so we should have an EV advantage compared to our equity. I said a lot of fancy things there. All I'm trying to say basically is that, so if the pot is $10 and you have 55% equity with your range versus their range, if you guys went all in on the flop, you would win $55 on average. EV obviously is the calculation of how much money you actually win, and that's based on a lot of different factors. And when I say that you're going to over realize, that means if you have 55% equity in a pot that's $10, but your EV is 60, that means you over realize. You gain more. You win more money of the pot than your equity right now dictates. And usually that's a function of being in position. In position will tend to over realize because they're in position. Really, the only time when you're out of position when you over realize is when you have a polarized range versus a condensed range. I get my low number. I'm gonna make the fold here. I think it's close. Maybe that's never a fold. Like, we do have the king of diamonds and the ace of clubs, but yeah, I guess I'll make the fold. So what was I saying? Yeah, the only time you really over realize as the out of position player is when you're like a 3-better versus a caller, or a 4-better versus a caller, because you're representing the polarized range, which gets to bet a lot. So even though potentially your equity might be lower, or your equity might not be extremely high, you'll over realize because you have the polarized range and you get to bet a lot, and he has to fold a lot. The ace-7 suited there, you could 3-bet it small blind versus button for sure. I just remember that guy opens pretty tight from the button, so I just folded the ace-7 suited. So yeah, that's what I meant by over realizing. So like 7 years ago, you're facing this spot with ace king, or even today in the live game, it's a pretty easy fold. Just because people would never cold 4-bet bluff here. And even now, we're not in like a great spot. However, it's a lot better to jam these hands, as people nowadays tend to play pre-flop pretty solid, in that he's going to be cold 4-betting the range that he's actually supposed to, which includes some bluffs like king queen suited, maybe ace queen suited, and of course ace king off. And yeah, he folded, so he had a hand that needs to fold there. And if he's in that spot with, like, let's say he's in that spot with queens, I don't think anyone ever folds it, but it's not a good spot for him. Like, if he cold 4s queens and then he faces the under the gun rejam, like not the 3-better rejam, he's not in a good spot. I think you might even see like some sims fold ace king off in that spot as the small blind. Like, under the gun opens and hijack 3-bets, and then the small blind cold 4s. Like, this is basically one of the tightest 4-betting positions in 6-max poker. And obviously when I rejam ace king, it's as a bluff here, if you want to consider it anything. Like, if you really want to try to classify this into whether or not I'm jamming for value or jamming as a bluff, then this would be a bluff. But yeah, they're not really useful distinctions. Basically, I'm hoping for both of them to fold. If I get called by either of them, at best I'm flipping or chopping, and at worst I am crushed. Jimmy's a good rig too, so his 4-betting range, cold 4-betting range is going to be balanced there. I think his cold 4-betting range is going to look something like queens plus, ace king off, ace king suited, ace queen suited, and like half of king queen suited, and that's going to be his whole 4-betting range there. So very, very tight. And he might be playing a different 4-betting strategy than what I just said, but that's what I think my 4-betting range would look like roughly in that spot. Ace two off, not strong enough to open from the button there. So these spots are always interesting to me versus the small blind calling range, because the small blind calling range doesn't have all of these like air junky hands that the big blind has. So you don't get to punish them as much when you're in the button, and you, I think on average, want to be more polar. Your c-betting strategy wants to be more polar, with often bigger sizes make more sense. As you're targeting his like medium capped range, you're not targeting his like airy hands. You're not trying to get all of his like junky, crappy suited hands and junky, crappy ace-x offsuits and king-8 offsuit type hands to fold. You're targeting, you're saying like, you don't have aces, kings, queens, jacks, and I do. You don't have like the strongest broadways, and I do. Your range is more condensed into like middling hands, where mine is more diverse with airy hands and really strong hands. And so I think your bet sizing wants to be reflective of that. However, full disclaimer, I don't know exactly what I'm doing in those spots. I haven't sat down and checked all the button versus small blind spots, because it's not really a spot you encounter much in these games, because you don't actually gain any EV from having flats in the small blind. But you do you do gain a lot of complication in your strategy and make it really hard to play. Where's that spot there? So I ended up going for the overbet. I was gonna roll between check raising and small betting or overbetting. Never really check calling here with pocket threes. I think overbetting is a thing in this spot. After he checks back the flop, he's going to be very capped. We're not capped. We could have check raises on the flop. Like, we can check to him with the nuts. We can check to him with bluffs. We can check to him with, you know, lots of a diverse range. He's not really going to be checking back 9-7 or queen 9 that much. So we're not too worried about those hands, and of course, it's just a better board for us overall as the small blind. It's a worse board in the sense that it's a very dynamic board and we're out of position, but it's a better board in the sense that we have a slight nut advantage, because we have all the queen 9 off. The only nut disadvantage we have is that he has slightly more 9-7 than we do. But he would 3-bet some of the 9-7. So we have like jacks, 10s, 8s pure, and he doesn't. And he would 3-bet queen 9 suited a little bit, maybe even 3-bet queen 9 off a little bit. So overall, we just have an advantage in nut combos and an advantage in overall equity. Alright, I'm going to wrap this video up here, guys. So we'll just play this last ace-king suited hand and this ace-queen suited hand, and that'll be it for this video. So ace-queen suited going to be a pure 4-bet for me in these positions, and it will be a call versus a jam. We're not very happy about it, Just like we're not happy a lot of spots when we have these like ace queen, ace king hands facing jams or jamming and we get called. But blind versus blind, we have enough equity with ace queen suited to make the call. Now, if he, like, this is how close it is with ace queen suited. Ace queen off would be a fold versus a jam, where this one would be a call. Interesting texture, interesting spot overall. So he does have some interaction at some part of his like lower part of his range. He doesn't like flop that many sets, but he has some interaction in the sense of like he has the 5-7 suited, 6-7 suited type hands. And we roll a low number, and I think we do want to incorporate checks on this board. I don't think this is a texture where we want to just bet our range. It is a texture where we could even include some jams. However, I think that the jams occur more in tighter range spots and not in these like very wide range spots. So like under the gun versus button, 4-bet pot, for example, you might see under the gun incorporate some jams on this board. But small blind versus big blind, it's not as much of a thing. I like the properties of our hands to check. Again, reversing his other ace highs when an ace does come, reversing his king, queen, queen, jacks, queen 10 suited type hands. When a queen comes, and he never has ace king, so we just have like the stronger, I guess he could have ace king suited, like low frequency, but we just always have the strongest ace high here. And check and win. Okay. Yeah, exactly. When he has like a hand like this, it's nice to, we don't mind as much letting them see turns and rivers. And I think that hand is pretty standard. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.